Hey everybody, welcome to Craftniks. I'm Nick. It's a tabletop hobby spot crafting everything from terrain to the game. And in this video, we're gonna go over some basic basing techniques for your miniatures. So if you're new to hobbying, stick around because we're gonna discuss what might be the right one for you. And if you're a veteran in the game, stick around too. You might get some inspiration. Now, just to mention before we hit the table, we're gonna exclude two of them that I think are pretty much inappropriate for this video here. So the first one is 3D printed bases. Now this pretty much easy. You print them, you paint them, stick a miniature on, boom, you're done, right? The second one is sci-fi miniatures or sci-fi bases. Now these could get really creative and really nuanced, so you have chicken wire, you have the cross-stitch mesh, you have credit cards. I've used credit cards in one or two of my miniatures. They're really cool with the numbers poking out. You can really do some funky stuff with it. But straws for pipes and all that stuff. So we're not gonna go over that. However, everything that we mentioned in this video, we can use for either genre, any genre, all genres. So let's hit the table and let me switch over to my studio mic. Let's go.
All right, so before we talk about the basing materials, let's take a quick discussion about the actual bases that are out there. So the first one is your standard base. A lot of manufacturers sell it like this, Reaper being one of them, and WizKids actually has a thinner base too. But however you find it, it's just your standard base, 1 inch. Now the next one is your slotted base. Most of these come with metal miniatures because they come with the tab from the molding process that they go through, but again, they come in circular, they come in square. Square you're going to find for your war gaming, like your regiment games and stuff like that. The third one is the same thing, the same shapes, but in MDF. So these are pretty cool. They're a little more lightweight than the other standard bases. And they work just fine. And again, you're going to find these in square, you're going to find these in circle, 1 inch, 2 inch, and so on. Now, if you want to be a little more economical, I think a little more economical, about $8, maybe $9 right now, you got the washer, the 1 inch washer, and these work just fine. Now, on one side, you have a sharp edge. On the other side, you have a smooth edge. And that's what I'm trying to show here right now in the footage. I usually put my smooth edge down because I create terrain, right? Just like you guys. So in order to save those projects and not jeopardize them, I kind of flip them over. Now I also put some duct tape on the bottom, and this miniature is on a washer and I put some of the green stuff over. Now we're gonna do that later in the video. This is the 3D printed bases. Straightforward. Ain't nothing to them but to do them. Now here's one that might be a little inspirational. If you got a small creature, you don't mind the size, use a penny. The cheapest base that you could get. I mean, I don't think they get cheaper than that. But I like to use them on my goblins, my kobolds, and maybe your bullywugs if you have some. I don't either. You don't get no cheaper than that. That is the cheapest base you'll ever get. The last one is this one. I just used old-fashioned chipboard. Went ahead and did a 2 inch diameter and then cut it out, and it worked fine. Now on top of it, I molded out some clay and I let it stick, glued it on, and we're gonna do that process too, and then sprayed it brown and then put some flocking over it. So again, I'm just showing the 2 inch dip. Let's get to the materials. So the first one I want to start with is the super glue and baking soda combination. Now I took 3 miniatures here, each with different properties, meaning the first miniature I chopped off the integral base that comes with it. It's a Reaper Bones and they come with these integral bases like the second miniature. And then I made a 3D printed miniature. I did some kit bashing to it, but that represents any miniature that's going to come with the base already. So 1 standard base, 1 MDF base, and 1 base that's already intact, ready to play. The super glue and baking soda combination, one of the most advantageous parts of this and why you might want to consider this is because at some point, if you have miniatures, you're going to be in the miniature game, you're going to get super glue. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. They're going to have 2 sides, the gel and then the liquid. I prefer the liquid. If you already have miniatures, you're going to have the super glue. If you already have the super glue, you could get baking soda from the dollar store, and the dollar store baking soda is what filled up that Tupperware there. Another big advantage to the super glue baking soda combination is the instant bond that it creates. It hardens up instantly. So this allows you to move faster through your craft, faster through anything that you're gonna do, right? And because it hardens, you can build up instantly. So if you want to build a little bit of elevation to it, a little bit of variety to your base and the look of it, again, you can build these things up instantly. And it's easy. I mean, you put down the super glue and then you just dip it, or if you want to hold it or it's necessary to hold it, you just sprinkle it on top. And the bond is so strong that it won't flake on you. We'll see with the other ones, maybe like flocking and stuff like that, where there's a chance to flake and we're gonna have to dress it up a little bit. No, not super glue and baking soda. It's not gonna flake up on you. However, the super glue is gonna run, it's gonna be pretty expensive if you keep going. You know, you're gonna use it for your miniatures, you're gonna use it for base, and if you're gonna go with the army look and stuff like that, it might be a little bit expensive for you. However, you're only dealing with one thing, one kind of material to use, so you don't need anything else really. You gotta like the look of it. It's a very fine powder, and that's one of the drawbacks. It doesn't have as much texture as some of the other stuff because it's such a fine powder. You're gonna maybe lack some texture. You can compensate with that by building it up, but again, it's such a fine powder that you're gonna miss that type of texture unless you do build it up. And again, that could run pretty expensive. The last treatment you'll want to give it is a little brush. So I took an old brush. Actually, I used this for glue, but it was dried up, and I just go ahead and brush off all that fine powder that gets onto the little crevices and whatnot. So this is a portion of it that's kind of a drawback because you really got to take your time getting all that fine powder out, or it's going to transfer into your paint job, and it could get, you know, on your brush, in your paint and whatnot, whatever it travels, or a wash, however it goes, and you don't want that. So you really got to take the time to brush it off. But once you do, you have a crystallized base, and again, this is something you can keep building on or just leave it like that. Last thing is I did one without the miniature on it, so you can see as I brush it away, you're left with a cementitious, plasticky, kind of hardened material with the super glue and baking soda. Just dry brush it or throw something else on top of it. One last mention about worth mentioning is when you have a miniature that comes with the base and you want to keep it, but it's just shy of that 1 inch, and you want that 1 inch, well, this is a perfect application because it's such a fine powder and you can control the super glue pretty easy with the fine nozzle. You can cover that base with the base you're using and have like a seamless transition between the two of them. And a shot of my half painted miniature, but you can see the fine texture of the powder, and it doesn't pick up the dry brush too well. You know, it doesn't have a lot of definition. It's all like static and out of focus, I guess, too. But yeah, and then there's my half painted miniature, but it was a good example of the base, and maybe I'll paint them tonight. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Another good plan is to get some sand and get some school glue and use that as your basic material. And you could get some sand for an affordable price. And affordable meaning what you get for that price. You get a large tub of it, and school glue is very, very affordable also. The combination of it make this a good go-to for a basic material. Now, I've seen this substituted with other types of sand. I've seen it substituted with kitty litter, gravel, and a combination of all of the above. Now, a combination is nice because it adds that realism of variety to the base. However, whatever material I just mentioned you apply, it's going to need a special treatment to kind of lock it in from shedding because everything is sitting on top. So how we're going to do this is we're going to first apply it as normal and then let it dry a bit and then come back and put down some water glue on top. And that's the one that I've seen mostly used. That's the one that you see all over the place. And most of the time it's done with an eyedropper. However, if you're really careful, you can also apply it with the brush. The problem with the brush is that sometimes you'll get the sand moved around. You'll get a look that you might not have wanted. It's a shuffled look, that scraped look, and it's not the one that you wanted when you sprinkle the sand on. So what I find is the most efficient way is actually to just put the sand on, skip the watered down glue, or add it as a bonus. And what I mean by that is the step that I take is to just spray a varnish from a rattle can, spray can, and just lock it in. It works. I apply the sand as normal, and then I follow up with the spray. And if you hit the miniature, it's okay. You just paint over the varnish and then revarnish it, and it double locks it. However, that whole process requires dry time. So you're not moving as fast through the miniature steps as you might want to, but it is easy and it's forgiving. The sand is great for your dungeon look. So when you put the gray on, it's a very nice neutral look. You can make it brown for dirt. Your possibilities are really endless with how you want to paint it. And I've used a variety of different colors also just to kind of play around with it. However, again, it's going to take a while to kind of lock this in because you're waiting for those dry times, and school glue, takes its time to kind of lock and settle in, and you don't want to rush it. If it's not locked in completely, you're going to end up shedding. And wherever case that you store these miniatures in, you're going to start getting the fine gravel. If you start using them, you might get it on your terrain or the table and whatnot. So if you're not thorough in your locking in process, it could shed a little bit. You can apply two ways. You can apply it by dipping it, as we saw, or you can apply it by sprinkling it. And the sprinkle method is going to give you more control as to how much you lay down. The dipping is going to give you a more concentrated look, which might be good to build up to the elevation if the miniature is already on an integral base. The last thing to mention about the sand technique is that you can actually apply this at any point of the miniature. So if you don't want to do basing, don't do it, right? Paint your miniature first, spray it, get through the whole process, and then at the end, go ahead and base it. Why? Because you're going to use the varnish to lock it in anyway. So if you have a full paint job and you just want to lock it in, that's a great time to apply this process. You're going to go ahead and lock it in. You're going to protect the miniature at the same time. And then you can come back and go ahead and paint it without the worry of shedding, because that's really where it's going to be a problem. If one of those pieces of sand, gravel come loose while you're trying to paint it, that is a setback, because now you're cleaning your brush, you're trying to get it off, and you definitely don't want to dip your brush into the paint that your high pigment paints that you're using. But again, it's a very affordable and common material to use for basing. And here's an example of me coloring in different colors, just messing around with it and combining it with flock, which brings us to our next material, the flock. So I bought these from Woodland Scenic. I bought 2 to add variety to the basing. That 2-tone gives it a more natural look. But it's worth mentioning right now that there are several DIY methods to create your own flock. I think I've seen sawdust or pencil shavings or blended sponges. However, this tub has lasted me years. And when you weigh that price versus the longevity of your material, it's pretty affordable, and it's a good way to go if you have it. And you're gonna have to depend on how you do it, but I've never had a need to create my own DIY. So I picked out some miniatures that I already had painted. Now, the one drawback to basing with the flock, unless you decide that you want to change the color, is that you probably, or you should, wait till you painted the miniature first. So this really becomes a last step, and it doesn't have the flexibility to really do it at any part of the step. So if you have painted miniatures, but you're just like, I don't want to flock today, I don't want to do this, you're going to have a painted miniatures just like this. However, on the flip side, you have miniatures that you might have come already with the base or black base or whatever the case is. This is a great way to just apply basing material to it. Now, the application process is the same as the gravel or sand. You're going to put the glue, you're going to sprinkle or dip however you want to apply it, and then you're going to lock it in with the varnish, or you're going to lock it in with the watered down glue. Now, the only difference between using the watered down glue is that because this flock in particular is a finer material, similar but not equivalent to the baking soda, you have more of a chance that this flock is going to attach to your brush when you apply the water down. So because the application is the same and it's pretty much the same method, you're going to have pretty much the same pros and cons. The only variation is, again, unless you're going to use it to color, or you're going to spray over this flocking, you're going to want to wait to the end. And if you're at the end of the miniature and you just don't feel like doing it, it's going to wait. So what I do is I have all these miniatures that I paint, and if I want to use green flocking, I kind of build up an assembly line. And then the day that I feel like, you know what, it's a good time to flock, or the kids want to join me and flocking and we do bang it out, I already have an assembly line of miniatures to go. So that's how I do it. But again, your workflow is your workflow. Another nice thing is that you're able to put things on top. So you're going to put extra foliage on top to really spice it up, sell it. You can put bigger like aquarium rocks on it to add to the rock. So you can definitely add to the variation to it. But it does suffer from the same dry time as the sand. But again, overall, it's really, really easy. This isn't too much difficultness to it. So that's why it's perfect for beginners. And then the last two things to mention is you can mass produce these. So I'm using both colors and I'm sprinkling them on to give it two-tone texture. And then you can go ahead and glue the miniature on. But you got to make sure that you lock it in really tight, because remember, you're gluing the miniature or super gluing the miniature onto the flock itself. Now, the last step is I keep a third container on the side so that that mixture that I sprinkle in, since it blends together, makes a uniform color. I'm going to go ahead and separate that from the rest of the box. And now enough about this green stuff. Let's talk about a new green stuff. This green stuff, which comes in blue and yellow stuff, but once you mix it together, you get your green stuff. So what's green stuff? Green stuff is like a modeling putty that people use in order to sculpt extra accessories on a miniature that they wish they had. If your miniature doesn't come with a cape, this stuff is great for sculpting that. If you want some extra details or you want some other accessories, this stuff is great for that. However, it's expensive. So I would recommend this as to someone who's interested in doing those sculpts for miniatures. This is also a great way to cover up those slotted bases or the holes in the washer because the green stuff holds so well. So the only thing you have to do is keep the blue and the yellow separate because they're both different materials, and together they harden up and they create that green stuff as a mixture, kind of like pouring the resins in, right? You can knead it like this, pull it apart, put it together until you get to a green color. And that's the putty that you're going to use. It's also great for filling in gaps on the miniatures. However, there are other materials for that. But again, if you are interested in sculpting, you only have one material that you can cover all of those applications with that one material. So one of the first things I do when working with green stuff is I put some old chapstick on it. And now this loosens it up. Because the green stuff is sticky, it's going to be hard to work with unless you get some type of like oil on it. And chapstick for me works the best. I can control how much I use and it makes it easier on the thumbs. Which brings me to a negative about green stuff. If you have any hand issues, this stuff working with it, and especially if you work with a lot of it, it's gonna put some wear on your hands. It's not easy, it's tough. So, you know, if you have any of those issues, it's probably not the best material for you. But I put a little bit on my fingers just so I could continue working or whatever, and it seems to work fine for me. Now, although it's tough, that's what makes it kind of great too, because it kind of holds its shape when you're sculpting it. And it hardens when it does dry. Even though there is dry time, it hardens really hard. So it's great for kit bashing. If you want to kind of stick things together, you want to hold them, you kind of want to sculpt it out, and then it just looks all seamless when you kit bash. So it has its pros and cons. And before I move on to the next material, I'm just going to show and highlight some of the different ways you can use it. So this one, I'm just sculpting by hand. Bought these little cheap sculpting tools. Really, really cheap from what I remember. I'm not too big into sculpting, so I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money, but they are efficient, they work, and I just sculpted some cobblestone that might look appeasing. And this is where the green stuff has an advantage because it holds up so well while you're sculpting that even if you make a mistake, you go ahead and flatten it out, you could rub it down, and then you go ahead and redo it. You don't have to worry about kind of messing with the whole thing. You just rub out the area that you need fixed. Another great application for bases is adding some elevation. So I'm going to take this mummy here from the Reaper Bones line, and I'm going to add some more of the bricks that come with that integral base there. And I'm only going to add it to the back side because later on I could throw on some sand in the front and make it a little more interesting. But again, this is a great use for green stuff. Now, I think it's worth mentioning at this point, there is also Milliput, and the problem is that I just don't have the experience with Milliput, but it is being told and said that it might be the more superior material. The pros and cons of it, not sure. It would be worth exploring. So if you have experience with both, leave it in the comments below. But I'm just going to go ahead right now. I'm going to use this green stuff to just sculpt more blocks and bricks to add to it. Another use for it is covering up the slots. So if you get a metal miniature, most likely it comes with a slot because that's how it was molded or casted. And I just used the green stuff to kind of cover that down, spread it around. And then I actually use some of those integral bases from the Reapers that I might not necessarily use on the miniature itself. So the ones that are laying up there next to the roller, they come from one of the trolls. But I'll use the texture from that in order to imprint it into the green stuff, and it works fine. Throw a little extra flock or sand or something like that, dress it up, and overall it gives it a good natural look. One of the things I like to do is also imprint the feet of the miniature into the green stuff before it hardens, and this just gives it a place where the miniature is going to stand and gives me extra surface area to glue it down so that it's nice and secure. That's a little OCD thing. You might be able to get away without it, or depending on how you cut any bases or any tabs from it, you might have some extra depth underneath. So it's a great way to hide that too. But my go-to method is the roller. I put a little bit of chapstick like this, and then I go ahead and roll it down. And we went ahead and we mass produced a bunch. You can see a couple up there, and we were just making more. So I was doing it with my son, and I put the green stuff down. He rolled it. He loved it until he didn't love it no more. So a good alternative to green stuff is air dry clay. Now they have some oven baked clay, and I'm sure there's others on the market, but I like the air drying clay because you could just use it, mold it, and then just let it sit. Now I usually do my hobby time at night, so my dry time is overnight. But again, it's easy to work with. It's a lot softer on the hands than the green stuff. So if that's a concern for you, this might be the way to go. Also with the clay, it's usually used for bigger stuff. Like, so I've seen people create whole monsters, these giant monsters with it. I've seen people use it as detailing in their terrain craft. So this is definitely a valuable option to have if that stuff interests you. Then you also have a basing material. But again, it's softer. It's a little more fragile than the green stuff. It doesn't hold as well. And if you go to roll it, there's a chance that it will stick on the roller. Now, this specific air drying clay I got is the DOS clay from your Michaels store, but I'm sure other brands are comparable. It might even be better, but I got a big brick of it and I still have it. So I still use it. I put it in a Ziploc bag so it doesn't dry up because it's air drying clay. And that's it. I use the same techniques. I imprint the foot into the clay, let it harden up, and then I have some more surface area to glue them. And this is a picture of me hand sculpting some what I thought were bricks until someone pointed out it looks more like an apple pie. So you be the judge. Comment below. But anyway, the last treatment that is going to have to be used is to glue it down to the base because clay doesn't have that sticky property that the green stuff has. So any chance I get to use this E6000 or E600 adhesive, I take it. I tend to not use it in a lot of different other applications, but because I have it, this is one where I do use it. The final thing to mention is I do develop a system where I know which miniature I imprinted. So I kind of keep them in line so that when it dries up, I'm not mixing and matching these miniatures because they vary slightly, right? So you want to get the exact one with the exact imprint. But when it's done drying, go ahead and glue them right into the imprints. And then this is just an example of one that I hand sculpted using the same sculpting tools. Yeah, I'm gonna rap this. But what you think, it's poison?
Inhumans.
Yo, first digital generation, my mind's racing about what we doing in this time placement. Facebook and the youth from day one, databasing. Birth to graduation for self-admiration. Likes and shares, got us digital freebasing at computer stations, loading information into a basin of means and standard deviations across variations of Cambridge Analytica to socially configure us with the stimulus to thinking we fly, but we fly like Icarus. Masterminds thinking long runs, particulars. Wisdom is planting a shade tree, knowing you die before reaching its benefits. If I lost you, hit rewind for what the message is. I'm just one man standing alone with no leverages.
So the last material we're going to talk about is joint compound. Now I want to mention one thing before we dive into its application is that joint compound is an organic material. So if you don't keep it airtight, you don't keep it locked and sealed, it's going to mold up on you. And that's what happened to me. I had some joint compound that I was using for the house and I didn't seal it up tight. When I went to open it for this video, I went ahead and saw the mold. So I just scrapped the whole thing and took this intermission interlude montage to Home Depot to get some joint compound. So right now you can see that I'm clearing off the lid and I'm gonna make sure that it's nice and tight for it. Now, there is a water bleach solution that you might be able to use, but I'm gonna skip that and I'm gonna try to just preserve this the old natural way. Now, how I go about dressing this up is I put some on a plate and then I start throwing sand in there. Now, I have this sandbox sand that's really not good for any application but this. And then I throw in a little bit of the coarse sand that we used earlier. And I have Mod Podge here, but I actually grabbed the wrong one. I'm not sure if this one is a super adhesive like the yellow container. However, the only reason I'm using the Mod Podge is because I painted some Blitz Bowl players a while ago and I used this after I had painted them. So it was a situation where I was like, how am I going to base these? I decided to try something you really loved how it came out. So I'm going to do this again with the new Blitz Bowl team, the Skaven. So I didn't want there to be any deviation from how I did it last time. And that's the only reason I used the Mod Podge. So I just go ahead and put everything onto the plate. And you can also add color to it too at this point and then start mixing it up. And I just go ahead and fold it on top of each other, get messy and stuff like that before I start applying it. And the last thing I do is keep a little water on the side so I can loosen it up just a bit, just enough. So I'll dip my brush and then I'll go ahead and kind of loosen up the material. Now, this acts like any of the paste that you probably seen on any of the social medias, but it is great because you can create the texture that you want and it has such a great dungeon texture. And dungeon bases are really the generic go-to. I mean, any genre, anywhere can just have a great gray texture base. And this application allows you to do it. And you can do it at any time of the process. I'm doing it here first before I spray paint and start painting everything. But on the other player, the human players of the Blitz Bowl, I applied it last and it came out great. And I put the color right in there. So it was like a one-stop application and then just did a dry brush over the top. There's nothing more to say. I really like it. It's like the model and paste that you guys see all around. And if you do DIY stuff around the house, then you're probably already going to have it anyway. Might as well use it. Now, this is a great material to also have for any terrain that you want to use. You want to use rocks and stuff like that. You could let this harden up, or you could put this over styrofoam, have a nice coating on the styrofoam and then spray the styrofoam piece. This is great for those packing ones that have the bubbles in them. I mean, those are aesthetically garbage. So to cover that up will be a nice look. And that brings the examples to a wrap. There's two more I should mention so that you can have a full picture of basing materials to begin with. One of them is, like we mentioned before, the Milliput. I just don't have experience with, so I can't comment on it. So if anyone can, please leave it down below. The last one is the cork sheets. I've seen these also used too. And again, I don't have experience with it, but they do come out looking pretty great. And they're flat, so I could see the advantage of that. Actually, there is one more. There's a third one. The third one I could think of is just XPS foam. You could go ahead and use it, or any of the foam really. There's nothing stopping you from using that too, and just dress it up just like you would do regular terrain, just on a small miniature base. We used it for my dragon. Let's see if I can get some shots up. And I think that pretty much rounds it out for at least beginner materials to use and which one's the right one for you. So I think right now at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and start displaying some of the ones I've used in combination, because that's overall what we do, right? As terrain makers and hobbyists, we use a combination of all our materials. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight some of those with some musical backgrounds, and then I'll see you guys on the outro. See you in a minute.
Alright everybody, so that's it. So I hope you guys found this useful. I hope you guys were able to make a choice of what might be the right one for you, especially if you're new to the hobby, and it's a great hobby to get into. And if you're a veteran in the game, I hope that found some inspiration and might change up your workflow and stuff, and just found something useful to it. So if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We're going to be doing crafting everything from terrain to the game. And if you see something out in the wild out there with fellow hobbyists that they might benefit from this video, please feel free to share this video with them, because they might need it if they need it, right? So that's all the ways to show some support if you feel it in your heart to do so. The last way is I have a Patreon open, so I have that in the description below. But this is just to help me keep some supplies going. So I just want to say a big thank you to the patrons that I have so far, and you know, any more will be greatly appreciated. I do a weekly check-in as much as I can, so a little bit of behind the scenes stuff right now, and I hope to grow that Patreon into something more productive for the hobby. So again, right now it's just to get some supplies and stuff as needed to just keep this channel going. And with that said, to everybody, thank you for the support, thank you for watching, thank you for spending your time with me, and I will see you guys all on the next one. Peace. Hey, did I forget to mention anything? No? I covered everything? Oh, and of course, my young producer, my son, I want to thank so much for helping with this outro. Alright, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. Hey everybody, welcome to Craftniks. I'm Nick. It's a tabletop hobby spot crafting everything from terrain to the game. And in this video, we're going to go over some basic basing techniques. Techniques. Now, before we hit the table, I want to discuss two of them that we're not going to discuss. I want to mention two of them we're not going to discuss. And the first one is, I think, is pretty obvious, the 3D printed miniature, right? No. Now, if you're new to hobbying, or you're new to the hobby in general, stick around, because we might discuss. Nah, we're not going to might. We're going to do it. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. Alright, who am I? Who are you? And in this video, we're going to discuss some basic basing techniques for your no, not for sci-fi. Oh man, been doing sci-fi so long.